Well, hello, YouTube. I am back with another review, actually, a second part to the book review of Know What I Mean Reflections on Hip Hop by Michael Eric Dyson. And I am producing this review a little sooner than I expected to, maybe a little sooner than you expected me to. But I know for sure I expect it to take a little longer. But after part one review, I realized that it would make more sense to review the middle two chapters in a part two review. And then in a part three review, I will be reviewing the final chapter five, along with the outro, the special thanks, and about the author. In part one review of Know What I Mean, I reviewed the prelude, the introduction first, and then the prelude along with chapters one and two. And if you recall, the chapters in Dyson's book are referred to as tracks, as if it were the book were the booklet to a compact disc or CD released by an artist. Um, just some housekeeping. When I started to read the book, even though, as I said in part one review, I can assume that Know What I Mean is a study work for individuals studying hip hop or the African American culture. It is a reference work for individuals like that. I have no intention of analyzing the book myself, only to review it. But I will say that chapters three and four were a tough read, even for me, because Dyson's intellectual voice, even in writing, is very strong. It's not the everyday voice, it's not the common person's voice. So it takes a strong mind to read Dyson's voice, understand what he's written, and maintain their own mental voice. So I dealt with that in reading chapters three and four, but nevertheless was able or am able to give some feedback in this review. So track three or chapter three, track three, is like the other chapters in long interview form. It opens up with some shout outs and head nods to individuals and concepts referenced throughout that chapter. And it focuses on the conscious MC or the conscious rapper, the politically aware rapper, the call to action type artist, but not without recognizing first the Black arts movement, which could be considered the root of conscious rap, where artists were concerned with what was going on socially, culturally, and most importantly, politically, and drew from those areas to produce their art, as well um, as make a point with their art and what they wanted their art to do, which was influence some type of political change and balance in favor of the Black man, woman, family, and culture. What Dyson says specifically is that the Black arts movement was marked by the Black folks' struggle for political and economic equality, something the younger generation or the more fortunate individuals in the younger generation may take for granted, which is why the conscious rapper, the conscious MC is less popular or less common. And conscious rap itself is rap that's socially aware and consciously connected to historic patterns of political protest and aligned with progressive forces of social critique. So the conscious MC isn't afraid to criticize the political environment at the time. It is the conscious MC isn't afraid to point out individuals who are the face of inequality. They want to bring that balance of equality. And in comparison to other artists, they're probably less braggish, they're less their aesthetic or the way that they represent hip hop would be different from the common MC who may sport golds and diamonds and things of that nature, the more common aesthetic that you find in hip hop artists. So, what you see with the Black arts movement and the conscious MC is a cycle of politics influencing art, influencing life, and those three concepts being very connected and driving the conscious MC. Dyson also speaks about the change that the conscious MC can bring and the limitations that the conscious MC faces. They cannot alone transform social relations and political arrangements, according to Dyson, nor should they be expected to. Dyson writes that they can do so much, but they often face criticism from civil rights leaders or their predecessors in the fight for change in favor of the Black culture. One instance in particular is or was one instance in particular that Dyson notes was the legal conflict between the Rosa Parks estate and Outkast once they released a song entitled Rosa Parks. Dyson notes that, or Dyson reflects on Rosa Parks fighting Outkast legally, even though the song Rosa Parks doesn't depict her in a bad light. Along with that instance, Dyson recalls the Lena Horne versus Janet Jackson incident where Janet Jackson was pulled from the Lena Horne biopic following the nipple gate or the exposure of her nipple during a performance, though it was an accident. That incident reflects the criticism of older generations on to younger generations in the Black culture in hip hop. And Dyson also refers to transatlantic Blackness in track 3, what he calls a blackness understood in relation to not one terrain or geography, but how they intersect and interact along a number of geographical, cultural, and locations. And what he concludes with is that hip hop took root in a culture of hardships and therefore the struggles of the black community drives a lot of hip hop artists and lyrics, but the conscious MC is just more politically more politically aware, and thus their lyrics and behavior and such reflect that. Um, this was the book was published circa 2007, so it doesn't reflect um, today's efforts like the prison reform efforts by Meek Mill or the Killer Mike Netflix special that focuses on an alternative lifestyle for Black America. Dyson also recalls technology and how it influences hip hop and the conscious MC. The conscious MC, he writes, is more connected to the underground hip hop, more connected to the roots of hip hop because of the urge for political change, but that the evolution of technology came in hip hop stems from the stems from another struggle that uh, hip hop artists have faced, where and specifically the example he uses is the turntable, where um, young black children whose parents couldn't afford to buy a turntable, ended up in shops and repair places repairing the turntable for the more uh, fortunate white America, and thus in experimenting put two together and learn to intertwine those intertwine the music coming from those two separate tables, and the evolution of the DJ came about. And there were a lot of points in track three, a lot of them very interesting, but mostly focusing on the conscious MC and the evolution of struggle through the conscious MC. Now, in track four focuses on violence in hip hop and the issue of masculinity, right? The issue of hypermasculinity, machismo, and the effects on the culture that we see because of those issues. Dyson acknowledges the influence of the handgun and as being the iconography of the ghetto, meaning that individuals in the ghetto get their sense of strength, industry, machismo, and manhood from the attainment of a gun, from the handling of a gun, and that itself being a reflection of a greater issue in American society, meaning that violent masculinity is at the heart of the American identity. Dyson reflects on Hollywood and Westerns, or the taking of American land from the Native Americans, and even the right to bear arms being amended into the American Constitution. So guns are a symbol of some sort to America, one, but then to black young men in for two. Dyson notes that hypermasculinity being viewed as a man dominating a woman, and then that viewpoint being the only way to be considered a man is by dominating a woman, and how that's a limiting perspective because it imbalances the black family and tears us down at that point. Dyson then goes on to write about the the visual injustice that hip hop videos offer, whereas the violence is depicted in hip hop or rap videos, as well as the sexualization of women. And he refers, and he even compares it to the slave picking process on the auction block as being a visual injustice on that level, and concludes that this is all a deterioration of our self-image as black individuals, and therefore a lack of understanding of ourselves if we don't know how to, if what is being reflected to us is demeaning or injustice. The reader then reads Dyson's perspective on gender roles and how they aren't innate, they aren't natural, they're formed outside of the womb. And when visual injustices through hip hop occur, our perspective on gender becomes distorted, meaning women become on the level was women become almost on the level of the unacceptable male, which in hip hop is usually the homosexual. The disrespect is on the same level, whether it be calling out of their name, it be disrespecting them physically. Those issues come, those issues occur in the Black community or the Black culture as a result of visual injustices in hip hop videos. Um, then, as a reader, I question if I bring up the question of, does life imitate art or does art imitate life, again, because how much of that visual injustice is translated outside of the music. What I did notice was, in reading track 4, Dyson very lightly touched on the culture of rape and physical disrespect toward women. Um, and I would have liked to read Dyson's perspective more on the culture of rape and hip hop's influence, if any, if he would conclude that there is any influence by hip hop, which, because many of hip hop's critics would probably conclude that there is a direct correlation. I assume that Dyson would have much to say about that as a retort to critics. Also in track 4, there was some politically correct answers or responses to the interviewer's questions. And there were some religiously correct answers and metaphors. I read in chapter 4 that Dyson is also or was at least also an ordained Baptist minister, which was like a revelation to myself, because I understood then why Dyson may take this tone toward this issue or take that tone, and why I realized that the voice of Dyson was very much an intellectual voice, but also very much the voice of a religiously aware individual. So also in track 4, we read about Dyson's perspective on homosexuality versus homoeroticism, which Dyson describes as two sides of the same coin, basically, and how straight men would find this troubling to know that some of the activities or behaviors that they participate in could be mistaken as an act of homosexuality. And that was an interesting point. And that wrapped up chapter 4 for me and made it worth my while in reading it. But then Dyson also concludes with this quote that I found very powerful and very fair in the fight for women's justice in hip hop, as also being a task for the male, because Dyson says, quote unquote, a world that makes women less than they ought to be makes us as men less than we ought to be. And that wraps up track 4. And again, this review covers tracks or chapters 3 and 4 of Michael Eric Dyson's Know What I Mean? Reflections on Hip Hop. Coming in part 3 will be a review of track 5. The track 5 the outro written by Nas, special thanks and about the author and whatever else the book concludes with. It's a very insightful book thus far. Though I will say that my next review will be of a much lighter book, probably nonfiction, even just to lighten the or just to relieve myself mentally for one, but also to lighten the environment or lighten the nature of my book reviews. So that's that. I appreciate your watching, and if you've read the book, whatever feedback you have, feel free to share. And thanks again. Until next time, be well.